And then you have, years later, the Aurum Solis, which is the Ogdoadic tradition, and they claim descent from the magicians, quote unquote, and scholars of the Careggi Circle. So there is absolutely this, if anything, right, sort of Homeric tradition, this legend, this they call it mythstery, the portmanteau of the word myth and history. It's a word, it's a recent word, but people have used this a lot in reference to Masonic history, specifically about the Knights Templars. But there's a mythstery. There's this legend, this word of mouth bardic tradition that all of these initiatic orders were expressions of this philosophy, this really esoteric religion that had existed in Italy since the time that Pythagoras came to Crotona. So like I was saying, when Marsilio Ficino started really, because in order to translate stuff, you got to study it. You're reading it constantly. And he did fucking volumes. Can you, just as a brief aside, how many of you people listening can actually fucking commit to writing in a journal once a week? This guy translated like 100 books, you know, like in his lifetime. You know, he didn't even live to be that old. So it's amazing what we can do, A, when we give a shit about something, and B, when we don't let distractions fuck us up. You know, now there's a million different distractions, a million TV, Netflix, you know, whatever it is, porn, food, your fucking car. It's always something. But this guy, I mean, it's staggering what he accomplished. And so in that period that he spent absorbing that stuff, he created, he has a very, very thick, well, we have a lot of his journal, his personal journal. And he goes on to talk about how he really integrated and adopted and began to understand and synthesize this Greek Hermetic Platonic philosophy. And so what he begins to do in that villa that Cosimo buys for him near Careggi, the area of Careggi.
Okay, so Careggi was an area. Okay.
Well, yes, but in this instance, the Careggi Circle, they're referring to the group of scholars associated with Marsilio Ficino, his circle, at that time when he was doing the Orphic hymns and doing rituals and having his little private meetings and parties, and really, I guess, a salon, right? People coming together to exchange ideas, talk to each other, and discuss these intellectual and esoteric topics. And so they claim that really they were doing magic there. That's what the Aurum Solis is saying when their historical documents from their founders in the 1800s are saying, you know, we this order, the Ordo Aurum Solis, is descended from a group of people that we call the Careggi Circle. Whoa. And that they were doing magic. And it's just interesting because that's what a lot of that shit that Marsilio Ficino was translating. I mean, he writes about it in his journals. If you want to learn about magic, you have to read Iamblichus. Don't forget to read Iamblichus, and he will quote the Mysteries, on the Mysteries, right? The Theurgic manual that he translated constantly in his journal. And he's constantly talking about magic, music, healing, mathematics. And that's all. It's the same shit Pythagoras was talking about.
Wow. All right. So Thales was said to have been the first to be called a sage, which was applied to the 7 sages, yep. I guess, of which would include Pittacus of Mytilene, Bias of Priene, Solon of Athens, which I believe you have described as Plato's teacher, then Cleobulus, tyrant of Lindos, Chilon of Sparta, and Periander. A lot of these names I'm unfamiliar with.
Well, I think that the major ones are Solon and Thales. So Thales was part of the group of the Milesians, the three ancient philosophers from Miletus in Greece, and that's Anaximander, Anaximenes, and Thales. And Thales, obviously one of the 7 ancient sages. I mean, how fucking cool is that? You
Pretty
imagine
badass.
if you die and in like 1,000 years, people are calling you like one of the 7 sages. You
Pretty
know,
fucking cool. So
um,
what does it mean to be a sage?
I don't know, man. I mean, like, um, they were considered wise men. You
Yeah.
know, that's really it. Again, we're talking about, that's the whole question, right? It's kind of the missing link in history. We could think of a million different things, right? We can think about, we can sort of conceptualize and have theories about how this shit happens, but there's just no explaining it. From our current perspective, we'll never really know how civilization goes from a mostly agrarian basis. It's safe to say that most people nowadays have no genius in them. And I think that that's uniformly true throughout history, is that there's something exceptional about people that we call genius, right? And genius, we get that term from from Thomas Taylor's uh translation of the daimon. He doesn't call it demon the way that it gets translated later. He calls it the genius. And there's something there as well about, the Arabic genie and things like that. It's kind of a similar concepts, but he very carefully chooses that word genius. And that's what ultimately, right, Socrates says. Socrates' whole thing is that he follows the promptings of what he calls his daimon. Like, I don't do anything that the daimon tells me not to do. And it'll whisper and it'll just tell me no. And it'll tell me when to do things. He talks about that, constantly. And that's a huge part that just gets not. He doesn't. I wouldn't say that he talks about it constantly. What I would say is that you can find many examples of that hidden in Plato's work. He does explicitly say, "I follow the promptings of my daimon, my guiding star. This thing guides me. Everything that you think you know about Socrates is just me listening to this thing." I will tell you right now, that is what it means to get in touch with your higher divine genius. According to the good, that's what it is. That's what I do. I don't do anything unless this fucking thing tells me yes or no. That's what it is. Big surprise, big reveal, guys. But that's what it is. The difference is it's not me. You know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
that it's not conscience. That's not what it is. It's not conscience. Conscience is a reflection of that thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is what the whole thing is. How do you go from agrarian farming, fishing to the city of Athens? How does that happen? Certain people are instrumental, right? And you have to possess a species of wisdom that is tantamount to like an evolutionary jump in order to develop these ideas, laws and sewer systems and utilizing the laws of physics to erect a temple. Like, that's insane. That like most people just fucking batted their sheep around in circles, until they could shear them and sell the wool. Most people. But there was this small group of guys, usually under the guidance of one dude, who just knew how to make a fucking pyramid. I mean, that's insane. Like, so this is the classification. This is the type of person that you have to be in order to you have to activate your genius. That's my idea. What you have to do really is you have to create an empty space so that your genius can sit in the driver's seat. You have to get out of the fucking driver's seat. And that's really the first lesson. That's what things like the Golden Dawn are preparing you to do, particularly in like the portal grade. Get up, get the fuck up, get out of the driver's seat, because that thing can't come in if you're in its place, right? There's no room. I can't put more water in a cup that's full. So you have to empty it so that can come in. Don't empty it and then refill it with your shit. Empty it and wait and invoke, ask it to come. And it will, and you'll know. You'll know immediately, because it's not you and it's fucking scary. but again, by their fruits shall you know them. It's not going to tell that doesn't necessarily mean that, look at it, right? Socrates' genius wasn't telling him go and volunteer at the fucking food drive, go and sit on the mountain and meditate, embody non-duality and quietism, wear mala beads on your wrist. No, that's not what the Daimon was telling him. Go sit in the agora and argue with people. And that's all he did until he fucking died. They killed him. That's the whole thing. That's the whole fucking mistake that we have with spirituality. You see it on TV. You see Deepak Chopra and Oprah up there on stage with her fucking scarf. She's dressed in white, like she's about to baptize somebody. And that's the thing that people, it sounds ridiculous, but these things, because of the gravity that they occupy, that they possess, right? We're not just talking about somebody doing it. We're talking about television. We're talking about wealth. We're talking about power. We're talking about success. That's what the West is obsessed with. So you take all those ideas and you put this specific image of what that successful, powerful, wealthy person is and looks like and does and says. And you have an entire population of people that are going to fucking chase after that ideal. But the main thing is that it's fake. It's a construct. It's another way. It's another system of control. In reality, the spiritual part of your architecture, which is bornless, that you have to let into you, is going to tell you, it's not going to tell you to do those things. Or, I don't know what it's going to tell you. You have a specific purpose. Socrates' purpose was to sit in a fucking agora and argue and challenge every Athenian until people hated him and then they killed him. And somebody like, Solon was to impart laws, but these people were sagesic. What it meant to be a sage was to embody a level of wisdom that was for their time superhuman. It was not available, not possible to other people. But it's kind of like this interesting thing with the collective unconscious. And we see it now. We see it a lot. Is that once you kind of acquire a knowledge or an understanding, and then that becomes a little bit more diffuse into larger mainstream populations, it's available now in the collective unconscious. I mean, that's, you see kids that are like, I've never seen so many prodigal musicians in my life. It's embarrassing. I was horrible for 10 years. Literally there's 9-year-olds who kick my ass on a guitar or a drum kit, and there's many other instances of that where it's like, we've acquired these virtues and these understandings. They're more available in the collective unconscious. So yeah, you look back at somebody like Solon who gives laws and somebody like Plato, and you're like, yeah, big fucking whoop. You don't understand. People were having sex with sheep. It's a quantum fucking leap for that time.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so some other notes on Thales. So Thales studied the mysteries in Crete as well as in Egypt, spending time with priests and astronomers under the reign of Amasis. I don't know if this is a good point to ask you just a note on the Grecian mysteries and what they entail. Maybe just some little side notes on that. It would be kind of cool because I don't know. It might be things we've already discussed, but particularly Grecian mysteries. What would those into? Would that be like Samothracian mysteries, or would that be like a separate one?
No, the Kabiri had a Near Eastern flavor to them. We also don't know anything about. We really don't know much about uh the Samothracian mysteries. Again, we have fragments, we have things that are passed on. It's not like we have like if you were to find a Golden Dawn ritual script in like a chest 300 years from now, be like, okay, this is what they were doing. But I would say the quintessential Greek mystery traditions were the Eleusinian mysteries.
Mm.
The mysteries of Eleusis or Eleusina, those were quintessentially Greek. Those were, I mean, just is they used to walk there, right, in an entourage from Athens. So, Athens is Greece. Athens is ancient Greece. When you think of these things, you're getting mostly the Athenian vibe. This whole idea of philosophy and democracy. Look at Sparta. They didn't do any of that shit. You didn't do any of it. As a matter of fact, they condescended to the Athenians. They called them effeminate.
Mm.
And I'll be honest, I mean, to this day, Athenians are fucking scared of people from Sparta. It's still there. It's still Laconia is the fucking place because it's like it's just in the culture. But it's you know those were the mysteries associated with the Athenian polis, the city state, the mysteries of Eleusis, and so these involved. And I've been there 3 times, the sanctuary at Elefsina. And I've done some vision work there, actually. It's just an amazing place to be. But it involved the mysteries of Demeter, Persephone, and Persephone's abduction into the underworld by Hades, which I think we've spoken about on this podcast, and how
Yes.
when you break down the names, particularly of Hades and of Persephone, Hades being the invisible one, and but really they called him Pluto, which is the giver of wealth. And Plato says that people didn't. He scares the shit out of people when you call him the unseeable one. So people call him the giver of wealth. And there's always multiple things, right? Because hell is in the ground, and that's where minerals are. Things like gold and stuff like that, precious gems. But also because uh well, we could get into the religious and philosophical implications, but in reality, it was a twofold thing. They were examining the microcosmic cycle of the seasons in relation to the primordial pattern of the soul's death, which was its birth in a physical body.
Mm.
In other words, to be born to the flesh is to die to the world beyond. And that's Persephone's name. It means the bringer of murder, or the murderer. And not only that, but in some of the tales, right? So, and I will say, go look at unless you don't want any spoilers. If you're in a Golden Dawn order, if you go and look at the 3 diagrams, particularly the first 2 diagrams of the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Eden before and the Garden of Eden after the fall, you will see multiple things in there that are directly, I would say, suggestive of or apropos to the Persephone myth. And one of the things is that Persephone is abducted while she's picking flowers. And what do you have to do to pick flowers? You have to bend down. You have to reach down. And the flower in some of the retellings of the myth is the narcissus flower.
Mm.
And then her mother, Demeter, walks the land weeping for her. Right? If you're familiar with the Garden of Eden after the fallout diagram, think about that. It's on there. And And then eventually, Zeus sends Hermes because he's the only one who can travel between the three realms, and you got to give her back because Demeter is starving the people. They can't give Zeus offerings. They're all dying. They're miserable. They're abandoning worship. Um, so you're throwing off the cosmic order. So send her back. But the thing is, in her captivity down there, refusing food, she grew weary and thin and hungry. And Hades convinced her just have this one little pomegranate seed, and she did, and she had to come back. He said, "Okay, but she's eaten of the fruit of the underworld, and so she's got to come down here at least half the time." And so, why people live there? Why? How the fuck does that make any sense? Well, it's emblematic of the idea that Plato talked about. You know, was this idea, and Plotinus talked about the reason that metempsychosis is allowed to happen. The Greek word for reincarnation, the whole idea of the degradation of the soul, is that we taste of the fruits of materiality and become too attached to them to move on when we die, and so we keep having to come back, and it's the same. This is the myth of Persephone, and this was the myth of Eleusis. And obviously ergot, that they synthesized LSD from, it grew on the hills there. And PD Newman's done a lot of work having to do with this kind of stuff, and the use of entheogenic substances and compounds for initiatic purposes. I'm not completely convinced one way or the other. Yes, absolutely, they could be, but I know for a fact it wasn't the end all be all. I know
Yeah.
for a fucking fact that it's not like, okay, this is what initiation traditions were. We just took drugs. It's like, no,
Yeah.
there's a whole other component, right? But that kind of gets it kind of gets pushed to the side. I mean, it's you don't, the research is important, but the you don't want to like go. I would say that I wouldn't want to take a Hunter Thompson tack to
No.
like this kind of stuff, because it's the
Yeah.
that and that's the whole dilemma of like who we are as postmodern people and the baggage that we unconsciously carry into the study of this stuff, which really people that were actually doing this stuff hundreds and thousands of years ago, I'm telling you, they were different fucking people. You can
Yeah.
see it in the way they wrote, the things that they built, the beauty that they embodied, the music that they liked, the things that they said, the things that they valued. They were not us. They were not us. And so we
Mm.
can't do what they did and expect the same results. There's a lot of preliminary work that needs to happen. But what's great about Eleusis is that, I mean, it actually becomes beloved of Rome. So when Rome conquers Greece, they actually give money to the temple. That now they're really flourishing because they're backed by the empire. And Marcus Aurelius was initiated at Eleusis.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
I got to send it to you. There's a big bust of him
Whoa.
that still exists. It's enormous. Still exists at Eleusis. Um, and I took a picture next to it. I'll send it to you. I'll text it to you. It's a really cool picture. But yeah, he was initiated at Eleusis.
That's fascinating. So there's an Israel, I think it's an Israel Regardie book called The Garden of Pomegranates. Is this related to what you were just talking about? What's the thing with the pomegranate?
To be honest with you, I read that book in 2014 and I don't remember any of it.
Okay, cool. I haven't read it. I have it like on a digital archive or something, but I haven't read it.
I did a whole course of it, Middle Pillar, Garden of Pomegranates, Philosopher's Stone, Art of
Mm,
True Healing, 1 Year Manual, Golden Dawn. I read all that stuff many, many years ago. And I mean, I guess I don't know. I don't want to say none of it was worth remembering. I remember liking it, but I just can't really remember a lot of it.
yeah. Okay, so Thales, he talked a lot about God, saying things like God is that which has no beginning or end. God is the most ancient of all things, for he is not begotten. He said that the world is animated and God is the soul thereof diffused through each part. Those divine moving virtue, those divine moving virtue penetrates through the element of water. He talked about things like the importance of knowing thyself and how easy it is to be run by another, how
Yeah,
sweet it is. Sorry, go
I,
ahead.
I think Diogenes Laertius, he attributes the saying "Noti Sauton," know thyself,
Oh.
first to Thales, but I don't know that that's substantiated anywhere.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. So how he said the importance of knowing thyself and how easy it is to be run by another, and how sweet it is to follow one's own divine will, of which has no beginning or end, and that is hard but good to know ourselves, for that is to live according to nature. So those are just some little tidbits on Thales. Do you have any last closing thoughts on Thales? Anything else you'd like to?
Well, just to your point again, talking about Democritus earlier, um, Plutarch, right, the Neoplatonist and the historian, um, he says that Thales actually went to Egypt and Babylonia,
Mm.
right, and studied again astronomy, geometry, mathematics there with him, with them.
Yeah, that's a good point to be had. Um, Kind of goes along with those as well. Okay, so then we have Socrates,
Oh yeah.
sculptor and son of Sophronicus. He was big on philosophy being the way to true happiness, of which he says encompasses the contemplation of God and to abstract the soul from corporeal sense. So Sophona Sophronicus, do you know anything about this guy? His dad?
No.
I don't either.
As far as I was aware, um, like the real historical evidence that we have of Socrates was his like believe it or not, I think an enlistment record, like a record of him being in the military.
Oh wow. Okay.
That's I mean his the first Platonic dialogue. Shit, I can't forget if it was the Crito or the Cratylus. Um, it might be first or second Alcibiades. Anyway, there's I anyway, one of the first Platonic dialogues in terms of like when we've dated, when modern scholars have dated to, okay, this was written probably this time, this before. It details Socrates coming home from the military. And
Mm.
he talks about it like that's the story of the Platonic dialogues. It takes place when Socrates gets back to Athens after the war.
Oh
So
wow.
it's yes. So I think I don't know anything about Sephoronicus. Is that was what the name was?
Yes. Sophroniscus. Sophroniscus.
Sophronicus. Hmm.
Sophroniscus or Sophronicus. Something like that.
That's not, in there. I hear phronesis, which is the wise. That's
That is probably correct how you pronounce
well,
that, yeah.
it probably there's just that's like the root of the name. There's probably that prefix. I can't hear it. I don't know what it means.
That would make sense though. Yeah. So he was a believer in the immortality of the soul as causal nature of living motion. He was a big proponent of justice. It was said that he never did anything without advising first with the gods. He was a man not of country, but of the world. There's a story about him being demanded what countryman he was, and he answered, not Athens nor Greece, but of the world.
Yeah,
Uh,
cosmopolitos. That's where
oh,
the term cosmopolitan comes from.
oh, that's cool. Okay. He talked about good people not being good because of some high birthright, but those who are noble in their qualities. He never did anything without advising first with the gods, like I was saying. Maybe you can elaborate on that. Do you view that as him having connection with the gods in the sense of like the planetary influences? And is there anything additional that you would like add in with that notion?
I would say that um he never did anything without consulting his daimon.
That makes sense to
Not
me.
not the gods, his daimon, because he says that. Now he swears to the gods. He said, well, here's the thing also, right? He's given a charge by the god Apollo to go out and speak. That's the way that he kind of embodies it. I'm pretty sure it's Apollo who tells him, to go out and gives him his mission. So he definitely does serve Apollo. But another interesting thing is that he checks in with his Daimon, his genius, his guiding star. And another interesting thing is particularly in the Apology, part of the last days of Socrates, when he's being put to death. He's on trial and he's being put to death. Well, actually, the interesting thing is that they give him a choice. They either say exile or death, and he chooses death. And he says, if I would have chosen exile, I wouldn't be able to die with any integrity. Because the philosophic life is its own reward, and it's the surest guarantee of reward in the afterlife. But the interesting thing in the Apology is that he swears to I think it's to Theos, to God. He refers many times or several times to God, not to the gods. He doesn't say I swear by the gods. He says I swear.
That's cool that you mentioned that, because I had wondered in this era with these philosophers what the name was for the god, and what they would have referred to that as.
The thing is, you have a lot of scholars saying like, well, no, they were avowed polytheists. So he was just talking about Zeus. He was talking about Sky Daddy, the highest god. We don't fucking know that. But what we do know is that there's a tradition of henotheism and ultimate monotheism, right? We see that. We see that in Plato's conception of the demiurge, right? And Plato in the Timaeus, right? Named after the Pythagorean character, the Pythagorean philosopher Timaeus in that book, who like it's rare that it's one of the Platonic dialogues where like Socrates doesn't speak that much. He's not the main character of the dialogue. In this dialogue, Timaeus is the main character, and he talks really the demiurge, Demiurgus, the craftsman. I mean, that's kind of the chief god. He creates everything else after him using the forms, right? And then we see that in Plato, that was what Plato would have. It's the closest thing he would have associated to agathon, the good, which is above everything else, the monadic center of the universe, the cause, of the universe, the first cause. That's his conception of it. And then you would have later on you'd have Plotinus talking about Tohen, the one, and then Nous, which was tantamount to the demiurge, taking the latent potentialities which were inexpressible in their state as the one, right? Everything all at once, that has been, is now, and ever was, in potentia. There's no way for that to express itself but through the aspect of the Nous, right? And it's a holy trinity, Tohen, Nous, Psyche. They were all a triunity. But Tohen was the absolute. It was the really the first thing. And so you see this tradition of henotheism or ultimate monotheism, where again, it's the white light passing through the prism. The white light is Tohen. The white light is Toagathon. Now, the spectrum of colors on the other side that were concealed within, when joined together in the white light, when separated, those are the gods. So yeah, when he's talking about I swear to God, he means the highest god. It doesn't mean Zeus.
Yeah.
So but a lot of like historians don't fucking think this way. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not their job.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying about like the bifurcation and compartmentalization of our minds, is that it would not dawn on them that because it's like, I know, historical scholastic investigation techniques. I don't know anything about Plotinus, his philosophy and Tohen and all that stuff. So, but it's important to note that, right? Because it's at the center of his theology. He's in his last days and he's swearing to it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. All right. So then now we have the man that you despise most of all, the one that you can't stand, you hate talking about so much.
Got my favorite name though.
Plato.
Yeah.
I say that very sarcastically because we know that Ike loves himself some Plato. So Plato said things like, quote, "Truth, O friend, is a fair and desirable thing, but it is a thing of which is hard to persuade man." Couldn't agree more with that. He was a man of liberty and opposed to tyranny. Apparently offended Dionysus, who told Plato he talked like a old dotard, and Plato replied, "And you like a tyrant." He learned from the wise men of Egypt, studying the universe, and it's believed that he derived much of his mystical bent from Hermes Trismegistus, particular concerning the divine goodness. He was opposed to extravagance. The thing I took away from him personally when I first learned about him, like my freshman year in high school or something, was question everything. I still, obviously live by that very much today. Um,
Just one thing I want to point out is that it's anachronistic to think that Plato learned from Hermes Trismegistus, because
okay.
Hermes Trismegistus did not really evolve until probably like 300 years after Plato was dead.
Okay, that's cool then. Yeah, whatever I got that from was a little bit flawed then.
Well, I
Um,
mean, if it's the internet, you got to expect that.
it was actually a Rosicrucian document, but could have been.
Those two. Those two. I mean, like the worst place to get that kind of information is actually from the mysteries
Yeah,
of our occult traditions, unfortunately.
yeah. Um, yeah, so there's obviously like full episodes we could do on Plato, but what are some of the ways you would describe Plato, his philosophy, his religious nature, his kind of core teachings and all that?
Well, first, there's a couple of things that I want to say.
Okay.
And because you can't talk about Plato without talking about Socrates. And most of the time you can't talk about Socrates without talking about Plato, because the bulk of what we know of Socrates, at least in his character, comes from the Platonic dialogue. They're not, we can't completely substantiate that these are factual documents. In fact, it might be a little stupid to think that, or
Yeah.
to even attempt to go that uh, route of interpretation. But essentially, a lot of what we understand about Socrates comes from Plato. One of the things that Socrates says is that I only know that I know nothing. And that's fucking wrong. That is one of the most abused and touted and incorrect translations of what Socrates actually says from the Greek. I have it right here. He says, quote, and I'm there's a Greek translation above it, and then there's basically a literal translation underneath it. Mind you, this was written by Plato, but it's coming out of the mouth of Socrates in dialogues. I seem then, at least as far as this one man goes, to be in this one thing wiser, since I do not claim to know what I don't think I know anyway. So does that sound like he's saying I only know that I know nothing? No, he's saying I don't claim to know things I don't know about. That's what he says. Why is that important? Because if you look at the Socratic trajectory, Plato systematically picks some of the most popular and well-known real-life philosophers, and he puts Socrates in a fucking mental boxing match with them. And Socrates creams them uniformly every time. Just and what he's doing is he's picking apart all of their philosophies one by one. The sophists, this guy, that guy, Cratylus. The only one is that he didn't do that with his Timaeus, because Timaeus was the I guess like the main orator of that whole thing. But other than that, like a lot of it consists in Socrates picking out the hypocrisy. What he does is that he starts with basically, okay, you say that you know this. And then systematically he goes down and he shows how they actually don't know what they say they claim to know. You see that over and over and over. But Socrates knows. Socrates knows before he even gets into the conversation with them how to destroy them. He already knows where there's wrong, where they're wrong. A and B, how do you go into philosophical discussion? I mean, that's the whole thing. Socrates talks, he says, look, I don't know. I'm sincerely, I just want to know. I'm just asking a question. And then something devastating comes out to the other guy's argument. And so it's like, he's kind of, it's almost like he's playing possum. Like he knows how to rope them in, but he's got to play it this way.
Yep.
And it's fantastic. There's so much more complex than people really, because you get tired of them. If you're not interested in this shit, they're already difficult to read. If you're not interested in this stuff, you're just trying to get through it so that you can, so that when the teacher calls on you tomorrow, you can give some bullshit answer. People don't actually read this shit, and this is, if you ask me, if somebody was like, okay, if you had to tell somebody who's just about to incarnate into Earth, tell them what to read, it would be probably 3 of Plato's dialogues, 3 of my favorites, and the Gospel of John. But another thing that I want to add on is in the Meno, the other Platonic dialogue. Socrates says this, quote, "We shall be better and braver and less helpless if we think that we ought to inquire than we should have been if we indulged in the idle fancy that there was no knowing and no use in seeking to know what we do not know. This is a theme upon which I am ready to fight in word and deed to the utmost of my power."
That is an important thing, especially in relation to the thing of not knowing anything.
Exactly. So this is another way that these things, these fucking scriptures is what they are twisted and used to kind of promulgate this idea that like this postmodern solipsistic nihilism that eventuates in this, really it's a psychosis that is inflicted on us. Truly it's a psychosis because it's stripping us of all our most human attributes with the idea that I need to let go of my humanness in order to reach some sort of spiritual development. Well, I have news for you, friends. That doesn't happen until you're fucking dead. In reality, you should seek to become more than human, as we understand it, as Socrates says, and live by ideals which are perfect. And it's not even about whether or not we can reach those perfect ideals, but it's about striving to embody them constantly. There is such thing as good. There is such thing as bad. There's right, there's wrong. Platonic philosophy installs you at the interface to know immediately, incontrovertibly, what is right and what is wrong. It removes gray area, which we're in love with gray area because that's where we get to sneakily do whatever the fuck we want. And look at, and use that as like our cover. No, it's not as simple as you think it is, and it's like, well, look at the society we have. It's a fucking nightmare. Because people, this is the way we think. This faulty fucking software that we didn't even, we're patting ourselves on the back. We didn't even do this. This was done to us, and we're waving it around like it's, we're an apex civilization. Meantime, everything is crumbling around us, and we won't point at the way we fucking think. We're just pointing at everyone else. It's like that Spider-Man meme where it's a piece of shit. It's like, and everything in the room is on fire. So that's exactly what I have to say about Plato.
Awesome.
That's what his dialogues are. That's, this is it. This is the essence of Plato.
So Timaeus, was Timaeus like an elder of Socrates or a contemporary, or how does he fit into this?
I'm not aware, like, in actuality,
Yeah.
you know, but in the dialogue, he's a contemporary, obviously, right? He's talking to him
Oh,
and to
okay.
a room full of guys.
Yeah.
Uh, but he's a Pythagorean philosopher because,
Mm.
right, Pythagoreanism was a tradition. The same way, Platonism became a tradition. Platonism became the tradition, but yeah, it was like that was the school he was from.
Yeah. Okay. And then so with Hermes Trismegistus, I don't know exactly where he actually fits into all of this, but I want to talk about him. Um, I don't know what the current scholarship is in regards to like the general consensus about him as a historical figure, if it's mostly believed that he was or if he wasn't.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah, I just want to ask you what you think about all that.
that's where you got from the Rosicrucian documents, because up until fairly recently, it was believed that Hermes Trismegistus was a contemporary of Moses, the biblical patriarch. So yeah, of course, somebody writing in 1889 or 1920 would have been like, you know I don't know. Yeah, Hermes Trismegistus used to have lunch with Plato and Santa Claus, but but we understand now that there are different religious implications, specifically because of when this really epithet begins to emerge, right? The combination of Thoth and Hermes and this thrice magnified, thrice greatest epithet, and it happens when Hellenism comes after the Alexandrian conquests, when Egypt is conquered by Greece and the Ptolemaic Greek dynasty is installed after Alexander's death. And there's just all this intercourse between Greek and Egyptian religion, culture, what have you. And the Greeks did it a lot. They
Yeah.
they were always saying, oh, okay, this god that they have is like our god who does this. And they appropriated a lot of gods, right? Hecate, not originally a Greek god, goddess. Hecate was, if anything, I mean, there's an Egyptian influence there because
Yeah.
Heka was the Egyptian god of magic,
Yeah.
and then you have Hecate, who was the Egyptian or the Greek goddess of magic and the moon, and so it's they took a lot. That's what the Greeks were. That's how they became, really magnificent. It's that they took from other cultures because they didn't have, like I said earlier, cultural identity was not what we don't have the historical context to know that this is we cannot assume that the way things appear for us is how it was back then, right? So they didn't have the same metrics or boundaries in terms of cultural identity. They had a language and they had a kind of a similar city state situation
Mm.
happening. Okay. And then they were seafaring people. They thrived on trade.
Mm.
So they would come into contact with all these people, Phoenicians, Persians, Egyptians, what have you. And they were very, very, many of them, there was a culture of curiosity and of, some people would call it appropriation. And I'd tell those people to sit down, because that's the story of humanity. It's just
Yeah.
like, hey, I learned this from you, or this is, you taught me this, or this, this, I found some value. There's nothing that's like original to anybody
Yeah.
anywhere. So,
So,
but that's what they did.
so like if we're comparing historical figures, say like Plato or Pythagoras and these guys versus a figure or an epithet, Hermes Trismegistus, in terms of their corporeal existence, allegedly, like what would be the difference in terms of historical evidence that would lend more power to the plausibility of one versus the other, like a figure of Pythagoras versus Hermes? Like, is it that we don't have um texts that describe people actually interacting directly, or like what is the like method of deriving a conclusion, or like maybe not a conclusion, but like what would you say is like more probable and why? Like what are the reasonings behind, say, somebody
Well,
like Pythagoras versus Hermes?
I would say that what happens is there's a school, right? And you have other people writing about when I learned from Pythagoras, he said this. And
Mm,
when we were in Crotona and he taught me this, this is what happened.
that makes sense.
That kind of first generation, primary source, a witness to the actual teacher in the event. Whereas what we have mostly in the Hermetic literature is everything is written by Hermes.
Mm,
For fucking from 100 CE to 500 or 100 BCE to 500 CE. This whole tradition of like, no, Hermes wrote this. And what that is it's appropriating a name as kind of like an intellectual brand.
yeah.
It's like Brill books. Everybody wants fucking Brill. Nobody can afford them, but
Yeah.
everybody wants like Brill on their. It's like you're not gonna read it either because it's fucking thick and you can't understand 30% of the words in there. but and if it, and it's probably so niche because that's like academic. It's like they'll write like 845 pages on like this one crack that's in the wall in a temple of Dendera. It's like so. But it's kind of like that attribution. Whereas like, um, we don't. Also, the style of dialogue, right? So it's like you have you have like in the Corpus Hermeticum, the Pymander is a great
Mhm.
example. You have these, kind of a son and a father, at least in the verbiage, but really most likely what's trying to be, uh, again, that threefold or manifold sort of symbolic narrative of like, yes, it's saying I'm calling you father, you're calling me son, but also there's a teacher to apprentice. And also, right, there's a god to a priest.
Mm,
It's all of those fucking things. It's all of them. Not only that, but there's the contemplative, mystic, hierophant, and the nous, the mind of God. And that is a main topic. That's a focus of the Pymander, right? And he's basically saying, and the discourse on the 8th and the 9th. It's another Hermetic piece from the Nag Hammadi, right? It's about this guy who's saying, look, I'm going to channel the divine mind. I'm going to allow the divine mind to enter into me. I mean, I think it's a Pymander when he says, I know everything that you want because I'm the nous. He says that I know what you are and I know everything you think because I am the divine mind. I know all your desires. So it's not Socrates in the Agora arguing with somebody over like, the nature of what is blue. It's
yeah.
like these very, very mystical, almost I don't want to fucking I didn't want to put this out into the universe because I don't want anybody to steal this, get the drop before I've done my work on it. But the thing is, what I'm getting more and more used to in this work is realizing I don't own the truth. And what I came here to do was give you people these fucking things anyway. So take it. Go and do whatever you need to do with it because that's the only reason I probably exist. But I look at the discourse on the 8th and the 9th in multiple instances, again, layers of it. It's a manual for initiation. The discourse on the 8th of the 9th follows Freemasonic ritual, follows Golden Dawn ritual. The entire ritual, like these rituals are
Wow.
based on the, it's the perfect format. There's an entry, there's an invocation, there's a lecture, and then there's a fucking, a climactic moment where the higher enters into, or the lower. And it's the same thing when the Hierophant or the worshipful master walks to the altar and brings you the light. You know, the Hierophant walks between the pillars, intercedes on your behalf, prays for you first, then initiates you. What you don't know is going on is that they're in an astral simulacrum, they're attempting to bring down your higher self. And so that there's one moment of very, very brief and tenuous union, you know, a bringing together for you, and that's the discourse on the 8th and the 9th. So these Hermetic documents are much more in the vein of, they're not really discursive, they're religious, you know, really, really supremely religious, very abstract, priestly in nature, you know, when you read them. And so I would say, you know, those two factors are the big things for me.
So, okay, some of the I don't know if you have any insight into this, but you know, I'm aware that what's his name? Was it Ficino under Medici that had brought into some of these things? But as far as like the original documents containing things like the Divine Pymander as a text, do we know who had originally authored
No,
those works? No.
no. I think I'm pretty sure what we have, most of the Corpus Hermeticum that was translated into Latin, I believe, again, like this information has entered into my brain, but whether or not it's able to find room and board there permanently is, you know, that's a different subject. But I'm pretty sure that they were in Arabic when Ficino translated this stuff. So it would have been, you know, Coptic, Attic, Greek, those type of things would have been the original source documents, most likely. But they're all attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. And that's the thing. But you see that in other, you see that in religious traditions. You see that when it's like, when it's kind of this like mystical, it's kind of the same way people nowadays, they say like, well, I spoke with my guides, you know, so then whatever horse shit comes out of their mouth next is like incontrovertible. It's the
Yeah.
fucking truth, whether it makes sense to you or not. And people would do the same thing back then. They would just say, okay, yeah, no, Hermes Trismegistus wrote this. I mean, what's his name? Um Moses de Leon, who wrote the Sefer Zohar, you know, the massive, he attributed he attributed the Zohar to Shimon ben Yochai, or you know, an established rabbinical kind of authority, you know, but he wrote it and he just attributed it to him to give it legitimacy, you know, and so that's our best kind of informed position as to why all these documents ranging from different places, different, you know, time periods, different styles, you know, and a lot of them even say contradictory things
Yeah.
at points. So, but they're all attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. And actually, Iamblichus talks about it. He talks about how our ancestors attributed rightly all the great works of philosophy and mathematics and astronomy and religion to Hermes. That's a quote, I'm pretty sure, from On the Mysteries.
Yeah. And then so think like in terms of timelines, something like the Hermetica, at least the original source documents, versus something like the Book of Coming Forth by Day, are those pretty much around the same time frame that we would have?
Well, the thing is that the Hermetica is massive. You know, you get the Tarcher Penguin version that's like this big, fits in your pocket.
Yeah.
It's like they don't tell you that, like, oh, this is like a very abridged version. The Hermetica is enormous. The Corpus Hermeticum is just a part of the Hermetica. Corpus Hermeticum is not the whole thing. As a matter of fact, it's a relatively small section of the Hermetica, because the Hermetica, it consists of the theoretical and the practical, right? The philosophic and the technical. So you have the philosophic stuff, and talking about the nature of the universe and the divine mind, and how the temptation of the material corrupts the soul and binds it here. Again, you'll find that in any number of theoretical or philosophical Hermetic texts, specifically from the Corpus Hermeticum. It's not unique to Plato, it's or the Platonists. This shit has been said over and fucking over. Nobody wants to hear it anymore. But then you have other, works within the Hermetica, and then you have the practical Hermetica, which involves things like the Greek magical papyri, and that's like technical stuff, astrological magic. I'm pretty sure the Picatrix fits into Picatrix is definitely in the practical Hermetica, right? Because that was Gayat al-Hakim. I'm pretty sure that was written in the 900s in Arabic, but it was a collection, the same way Agrippa collected all these works and put them into the 3 books. The sage who wrote the Picatrix did the same thing. Just, I'm collecting all the wisdom of this, the astrological magic and talismanic magic, and I'm putting it all here for you. And they're incredibly similar.
Yeah. So when it's said that Plato derived much of his knowledge from Hermes Trismegistus, would that make plausible sense at this time frame that he would have had access to any of those?
No,
No.
because Plato did not exist contemporaneously with Hermes Trismegistus. Plato lived, I'm pretty sure 300 to 400 years before we entered into the Common Era.
Mm-hmm.
So you start seeing Hermes Trismegistus really around the 1st century BCE, maybe the 2nd. So we're talking about this like 100 years after Plato dies, really is when you start seeing things attributed. And it's the practical stuff that's first.
And so that would go along with like the Corpus Hermeticum as well?
Yeah. Corpus Hermeticum was all this stuff is all like all this stuff really that Marsilio Ficino got his hands on was medieval Arabic translations of the original Greek Coptic, but it all emerging in Alexandria. Alexandria did not exist while Plato was alive.
Oh, okay.
It happened after him. So Hermes Trismegistus is not, this happened as a consequence, right? Because it's Thoth Hermes. It's when Egypt and Greece mixed. Okay. Greeks had been going to Egypt, but they didn't mix. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like when Alexander brought Greek culture to the Egyptian world and say, we're your overlords now. We love you, but we're your overlords. That's when you get the Hermetic literature. Before then, it doesn't exist.
Sorry,
the thing is this, it's an inverse relationship. Plato was not informed by Hermes Trismegistus. Hermetic philosophy was informed by Plato.
Okay, so what about like, I don't know the origins or whatnot of something like the Book of Coming Forth by Day. Wasn't that said to have been like authored by Thoth, which maybe would have been correspondent with Hermes?
Same thing there, where right, because there's a tradition specifically for Thoth and for Hermes. Mm-hmm. They say in their mythological canons, in their descriptions of the god and his duties, for both of them, they were the inventors of the arts and sciences. Again, Iamblichus says our ancient forebears. Iamblichus wasn't even Greek. He was Greek. He spoke Greek, and he believed, he had he inherited a Greek tradition. But what Iamblichus tried to do was say, okay, yes, to a lot of this, but also we need to incorporate the Egyptian stuff. We need to incorporate the Chaldean stuff, right? That he brings in the Chaldean oracles. and stuff, because that was like the manual, the quintessential text for his theurgy was the Chaldean oracles. And so he's trying to blend them, to mix them, because he says like the Greek stuff is way too heady. It's all in here. But what needs to happen is, in order for you to experience all this spiritual shit that you're alluding to, you have to abandon discursive rational thought, and you have to have an experience that is trans-rational. You cannot explain it. It has nothing to do with the fucking material universe. You know, you cannot explain it. And so that was his thing, and he believed that that's what the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Chaldeans were doing in their rites. And this is exactly what I was talking about earlier, when you have to abandon the driver's seat, you know, and that's really what it is. But what happens there is that Hermes and Thoth both are attributed as, you know, the instructors of humanity. They create science. They create the art of astronomy. Hermes is responsible in large part for like he makes the first lyre. You know, he actually, it's pretty gruesome. He's born and he rips the shell off of a turtle, and I'm pretty sure he uses like something's intestines to make the strings, and he plays this lute, and Apollo is there, and he is so pleased by the music, and so taken aback that Hermes created this, that he gives him the caduceus staff. And it's with the caduceus staff now that Hermes can travel through all three worlds. And, you know, and Thoth is the great scribe. Now, what's interesting about scribes, and we get this from a Hellenistic Egyptian, actually, I think it's ancient Egyptian, but we get it from an ancient Egyptian extract that was given to kids in school. And it's the teacher telling the kids, become a scribe. You know why? Because scribes can read and write. And so because they can read and write, they're always the foreman. They're never the laborers. They're always in charge. So the teacher's telling the students in this case, if you want to be something, be a scribe, because no matter where your area of specialty is, you're going to be the foreman. You're going to be the manager. And it was true of Zosimus of Panopolis. He was a priest scribe, but specifically for the workers of metal who were dyeing metal for Egyptian religious statuary. So there again, you have this idea of Thoth as a scribe. He's the one in charge. He's the boss. He sets everyone to work.
Okay, so I'll poke one more time. So like Hermes was said to have made the first lyre. You know, the lyre was played by Pythagoras.
Played by Orpheus.
Orpheus.
I mean, he you know, Pythagoras is claimed to have discovered his theory of ratio and proportion by experimenting with, you know, the lyre or the a particular string. You also have to realize that, like, Hermes, when we talk about Hermes making the lyre, we're not talking about history. You know.
Yeah. No, I know. I'm just trying to so and like given that a lot of these guys studied in Egypt, and doesn't Thoth predate Pythagoras, and aren't like things of Thoth like inscribed on Egyptian walls, and is it possible that the transmission of the information and like the god form of Thoth and things along these lines were transmitted, and then maybe over time that what could be considered being associated with Hermes, that Plato would have got his information? Or do you still say no? I don't know.
I think it's, personally, I don't think that's necessarily wrong, saying that he learned his information that way through Thoth, because he does mention Thoth, right? And he works, he mentions how Thoth invented all this stuff, but they could be actually, you know, referring to exactly that. But in my opinion, knowing what I know about what, you know, those people who would have thought this stuff years ago,
Mhm.
depending on what if we're talking about a Rosicrucian, I don't know what Rosicrucian document you're talking about. People write Rosicrucian books now, but the
Yeah.
thing is, the Rosicrucian movement, as a literary movement, kind of died at the end of the 1700s.
Yeah.
And I think one of the last great Rosicrucian works was, well, anyway, people are gonna fight me on that, so I'm just gonna keep my mouth shut, right? But I think personally, if it's an older book, there's a mistake being made because they thought, Hermes Trismegistus was the was a contemporary of Moses. They could also be speaking poetically.
Yeah.
They could definitely be speaking poetically. But I think it would be more appropriate, given the time period, to say either he was a student of Thoth or a student of Hermes.
I
Because
agree. Yeah.
to me,
Or probably because the name Hermes, I would feel like Thoth would be more relevant to relating it in
well, and
terms of
it's really clear that Hermes Trismegistus and the god Hermes are not the same thing. They're not the same. They're not meant to be the same thing. Hermes Trismegistus didn't look like an ibis. Hermes Trismegistus
right.
was not a
Yeah,
god.
that's a really good
You
point.
know,
Yeah.
Hermes Trismegistus was the archetype of like an old mage alchemist. You always see him with a beard, and he's got like the wizard's cap, and he's got some wand, and he's doing math.
Yeah,
It's
definitely
not
not like in regards to a historical figure then in that context. Like they wouldn't be
right.
saying Hermes Trismegistus, he learned from Hermes Trismegistus as a historical figure, but maybe as what Hermes Trismegistus represents in terms of like a symbol or something like that.
Yeah, like speaking poetically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
Like as if to say, really, I mean, Hermes Trismegistus in a lot of ways is kind of also a reflection of or of well, I would say Thoth would be a so in some, we're getting kind of hairy in the waters here, and I'm not trying to confuse anybody here, but I will say in some, like 19th, early 20th magical societies, they viewed Thoth as the Egyptian concept of the nous and the
Mm.
divine mind, and really, it's kind of hairy. They
But
kind of
in the divine Pymander, isn't it Thoth speaking to the divine Pymander, or is it not?
no, it's Poimandres.
Oh, okay.
Where the name comes from. Poimandres means shepherd of men, and he
And
says,
who is it
I
that is speaking with him?
I it might be Tot, but
Oh,
I'm not 100% sure
and that's not
because
correspondent with Thoth.
no, no.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of this student apprentice thing that's
Yeah,
happening because Poimandres, the divine nous, is way higher, right?
yeah.
Tot is like this young green apprentice who's asked, doesn't really know what's going on. He's like, please teach me, instruct me.
Oh,
Or at least according to what we're talking about now, really, Hermes Trismegistus would be the master. Hermes Trismegistus would be the expression of the divine mind. Um, he'd be the higher one in like, okay, discourse on the 8th of the ninth, when the father, the teacher, he's the one who says, okay, my son, you're going to do this thing, you're going to pray and chant and we'll sing together, and then I'm going to let the divine mind enter into me, and I'm
mm.
going to have a vision, and then I'm going to tell that vision to you. Turns out he has the vision, but he can't really explain it because he says these things transcend words. That would have been, if anything, the figure of Thoth or Hermes
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Trismegistus. It's never, the littler guy is more, either the acolyte or the flesh and blood kind of the persona.
Like a
It's
representation of the initiate or something along these
yes,
lines. Yeah.
exactly.
That makes total sense. I'm gonna relight my incense real quick, and then maybe we can move into the Neoplatonists.